Hello, and you are listening to Bill Murphy's Red Zone podcast. I interview leaders who inspire me in the areas of exponential technologies, business innovation, entrepreneurship, thought leadership, enterprise IT security, neuroscience, philosophy, personal development, and more. Welcome to the show. Welcome back to the show, everyone. This is Bill Murphy, your host of the Red Zone podcast. Today, my guest is Jeff Tippett. Jeff is an expert with persuasion and communication. In fact, the title of this particular episode and blog post will be Unleash Your Superpowers, Communication and Persuasion. Knowing that every one of my listeners, at least 51% of your time is spent communicating, persuading, influencing others to your particular vision, to your particular narrative, to be your particular thesis of the way you want to see something happen. And so this episode is going to serve as a great reminder of the type of things you need to remember about how you communicate. And I love Jeff's stories. Pay attention to Jeff's stories and really reflect on the story you're telling, the story you're telling your staff, the story you're telling your customers, the story you're telling your CEO, the story you're telling your boss. Very, very important to look at, is it simple? Is it direct? Are you using the word you, Y-O-U, in your communication? Also, we explore the use of the word imagination. I love that. He talks about the power of the word imagination and how you can establish your authority, your branding, you as you Inc., as Bob Inc., as Jane Inc., within the overall structure of your organization, and how you can establish your authority, your brand within your organization, the brand of IT, the brand of security, the brand of your business. So pay attention to these pieces here in the storytelling around the conversations, the metaphors, the images, because these are the things I think will bring a lot more amplification, help you pour gasoline on the fire of your own message. So, and Jeff also has a new book coming out that I'll have links to. He has a text where you can join his mailing list and be notified upon that book's dropping here soon in the next couple of weeks. So with that, I want to welcome you to a great conversation I have with Jeff Tippett.
Thanks for the opportunity to be here. I'm excited to chat with you and your audience.
Well, I know one of the big things we talked about prior to this was really the need for learning and as leaders becoming better communicators, becoming better persuaders. What do you find right now with leadership as a quality within your space that is, you would say it's a quality that if you could jump in everybody's brain and you could turn the gears, you would have them do what?
You know, my big, bold statement is this, that we all live or die based upon our ability to persuade. So from my perspective, it doesn't matter if you're the CEO of a company, if you're the CIO, if you're an entrepreneur, if you're in sales, or if you just don't want to live alone for the rest of your life, that we all live or die based upon our ability to persuade. So from my perspective, if I can help people understand how to persuasively communicate better without ever manipulating people around them, that it will help them rise to the top.
Sometimes I think that if people were more focused on themselves from how they're presenting themselves in the workplace, meaning are they good stewards of their own energy? Are they good stewards of their own enthusiasm? What does just personal responsibility mean about how you're carrying yourself in and amongst people play into your thesis?
It plays out this way. So we are all giving clues as to our brand. Now, so people sometimes think brand is your logo or your color or font treatment. It has nothing to do with that. Brand is held in the eyes of your audience, those that are looking on. And some people say, well, hey, I'm just in the middle of the company. My brand really doesn't matter. And what you're actually saying is, my brand doesn't matter. So your brand is saying something. So I encourage people to focus on their brand, what they're putting out there, how they're messaging themselves as a way to stand out.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've several CIOs certainly the entrepreneurs I'm working with, but the CIOs in particular, several of them have gone up through the ranks recently to become CEOs. and some CISOs, Chief Information Security Officers, have gone on to become CIOs. And it's interesting the shifts that have happened with them as far as how they're playing the game. They're playing it as almost themselves incorporated, and how they would approach the business if they were essentially subcontracted, and how they would play it differently. So it's interesting. How do you want people to leave your presentations when you speak to them? Like what is the feeling you want them leaving with?
When they walk out of a keynote or a seminar, I want them to feel my energy. I want them to feel the presence that I bring to the table. I also want them to walk away with actionable content, things that they can put into play that can change their life. And at the same time, I want them to walk away feeling like, to the degree possible, we have had this emotional connection, this emotional bond, because that is part of persuasion as well. It's creating that common ground there.
It's interesting because as a lot of people like to complain about millennials and such. And I think what's interesting about millennials is they're demanding a personal kind of contextual engagement that I think is aggravating for a lot of older folks. Yet at the same time, it's interesting because if you're persuading people, wouldn't you want to have context around the people that are working for you? What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I think it's a fantastic change that's happening in our workforce, and I give millennials a lot of credit for that change and that demand for a connection, that demand for authenticity. And admittedly, earlier in the workplace, it just didn't exist there. But what we find is that through this type of connections, that groups perform better, we trust one another better. I know that when I'm on stage talking, the best responses I get are when I share shortcomings or things that I did that just didn't work out, or examples in my book of things where I just messed up. And what happens is people trust me more by my willingness to be open and be transparent. They like them better than my success stories.
So one of the things I forgot to mention up front is about your book. I was going to bring it up a little bit later, but I think it's great that we're talking about it now because I'd like to find out from you, when you're crafting your message, you've clearly broken this into several component parts within chapters. Is there from a leadership point of view, and someone sitting there driving into work right now, and what is the key question that they can be asking themselves? For example, when I'm thinking right now, I'm thinking, well, what is my simple clarifying message? What is my ethos? What is the simplest message that I can convey who I am or what I do? That kind of pops into my head. But what do you think people should be asking themselves that drives a clarity of message?
Great question. And Albert Einstein said it this way. He said, if you can't explain something simply, you don't know enough about it. So I have a whole chapter where we take like all this stuff that's bouncing around in our head, because I think this is one of the areas where we miss the mark, is being able to craft this very simple message. And we're to a point now with our time and with our attention spans that our audiences are demanding very short messages. Now, that doesn't mean we can't tell the full story. It means that we need to tell it in bite-sized portions. So, for example, when people ask me, hey, Jeff, what do you do for a living? My response is very simple. I say I speak professionally. Almost every single time, what follows that is now them pulling more out of me. And they say, Jeff, what do you speak about? And I'll tell them I speak on persuasive communications. And now I've whet their appetite for the next level of information. And they say, well, Jeff, I guess that sounds like you just teach people how to manipulate for a living. And I'm like, no, let me explain the difference. So what happens there, and I talk about this in my book as an inverted funnel. What we're after is bite-sized pieces of information. Word to word to word. We want to capture people's attention with one word that makes them wonder what the second word is. And this is not an explosion of information. This is very concise, packed information that whets their appetite, makes them ask you for the next level because they're so interested.
So can you give an example of that? And the reason that I want to dive into this is that a CIO or a CISO can either come from a business angle, like they've been hired up through the business channel, or they can come from a technical angle. Same thing with entrepreneur. They can be super bits and bytes oriented from a tech point of view, or they can come from more of a business aspect or more of a right brain versus left brain. How do you coach someone with persuasion that tends to be more kind of left brain oriented versus right brain, from their dynamism versus being someone who might be more introverted and more quantitative focused?
So in that chapter on positioning your message, one of the things that I talk about in there is understanding like how people respond. And here's what we know. We know that people primarily respond out of emotion and not logic. People respond with the feeling before they think. And probably one of the best applications of this is finding ways that you can incorporate both, but realizing you probably need to lead with the emotion and find what is emotional in the story, emotional in what you're saying, lead with that, work in the logic, and you'll have your best chance of persuading and moving them with you.
Yeah, it's interesting because as the world of information is expanding and we're having to make sense, really the higher level thinking with a lot of people is making sense of, certainly within my audience, is making sense of a lot of complexity and spending time distilling the message into something that is simpler, digestible, but doesn't lose the fact that there was analysis involved. And then I really like what you're saying about how many people are actually taking the time, but what's the emotional response of all this information? Like, what's the emotion of the story you're trying to tell around the information? So is that one of the pieces you're trying to convey, is telling a story and what's the emotion behind the information you're presenting?
Absolutely. So what I like to do first is let's focus on the simple message. And at this point, we're not pulling in emotion. We're not pulling in positioning. We're not pulling in like the type of action we're going to ask out of people up front. All we want to do is we want to distill this down to the very simple message. And typically what I ask people to do as we work through this process is, first of all, like kind of like what you just identified, when there's so much information in our head, is to debrief yourself. Go through, take a whiteboard, that's what works for me, or a legal pad, or whatever works for you, and get everything out. For me, it's like ping pong balls bouncing in my head. It's extremely complex. I do a lot of public affairs work through my firm. Policy is anything but simple. It's extremely complicated. So going in and debriefing yourself, pulling the information way down, then looking at it, when you get the basic information out there, look at it and ask yourself, well, what problem am I solving with this message that I'm trying to convey there? And then look at everything that you have written out on your message and begin to strike everything that is not crucial. What we're looking for is just the main words that are extremely important. I encourage people, don't block them out. Let's just strike through them, because we're probably going to bring them back at a different level of communication. But finding that very simple way of stating it, striking out every single thing else that's not become part of that. And then to what you were just saying as well, to remove all internal or generally unknown jargon. Sometimes it can create barriers as we're communicating to others. So how do you pull all of that out to make your content a bit more approachable?
Does metaphor work, or verbal imagery, or physical imagery? Like, what tactics and skills do you encourage leaders to build into their repertoire of communication?
Absolutely. So one of the words that I love to use, and I use this from the stage all the time, and I use this when I write, is using the word imagine. And what that does, it sets your audience up. It frees their mind past any of the barriers of reality or what could really happen. It sets them free from all of that and allows them to picture the world, picture the situation, picture the environment the way that you want to describe it to them. So by using the word imagine, and I do that in sharing the story of my international adoption, for example. I'll say, I had a situation several times where guns were pointed at my head, when I had machetes held at my neck, when I got run out of towns and out of cities because of the violence that was erupting in Haiti during this time of political unrest. So I'll say things like, imagine what you would do with a knife, a machete held to your neck. Imagine what you would do with a gun pointed at your head. Imagine what you would do if you had to flee the city and jump on the back of a truck to save your own life. So what I'm doing here is I'm using the word imagine, which enables them to create their own mental picture. I'm using the word you, and I'm using it extremely early in the conversation, because that lets them know this is about you and what's important to you.
Well, we've got a couple things there I want to go. First of all, you've got to tell the story about the machetes in Haiti. We can't just leave that there. What actually happened in Haiti?
So I ended up adopting a baby from the country of Haiti, and it wasn't something that I chose to do. I never pictured myself doing this. My father went over to do humanitarian relief and came back, and told me the story, speaking of stories, told me a story of a ninth grade translator that was in an English-speaking American Christian school and happened to get pregnant. And the school gave her two options. They said, you can get rid of your baby and give up your baby, or you can quit school. Like, I can't even imagine what that type of decision was like for her. But she made the gut-wrenching decision that she wanted to find a home for her baby. So I, within the first 30 days, flew over to meet the baby, brought food, clothes to her, money, some medicines as well. I got a chance to just meet her and bond with her. And it was 6.5 months of the hardest time of my life navigating this space. There were times I just wanted, like many entrepreneurs, just throw my hands up and quit. I wanted to give up. There were times that I had to face, when I thought that it was the Haitian government against me, even things internally where I was fighting myself. So, for example, at one point my attorney emailed me from Haiti and said, look, Jeff, the office that you need has shut down. And of course, this was part of Aristide's government collapsing. He's like, we don't know if it's going to open again or when it's going to open. He said, at best, you need to consider your adoption on hold. But at worst, you might need to face the fact here that your adoption is over and you're never going to be able to complete this adoption. Of course, I was devastated. But within the week, I flew to Haiti. And this is my mode. This is what I did. Every single day, I got up with my translator and I walked to the office that I needed the signature, to go home at the end of the day disappointed because, of course, no one showed up. So finally, about 2 weeks into this situation, someone did show up at the office. And you can imagine my messaging, what was happening. I was full of emotion. I was full of anxiety. I was full of frustration. I was full of anger. And I also knew, like, my approach in the past had always been really to manipulate others to get what I wanted. And I fell flat on my face because it just didn't work in Haiti. When he first started talking, I was conveying words like I, me, and my. I want to adopt this baby. I need you to sign. I need to give her a home. I need to do this. Everything was about I. And guess what happened? Nothing. He glassed over. And so I had to redirect. I had to figure out, what have I done wrong? And how do I reach this person? Because obviously this isn't going to happen the way that I'm approaching this. So, with the limited knowledge I've had of Haitians, what I did know was this. They love their children. Their babies are like jewels to them. So I turned my messaging around to him, and I made it centric to her. And I talked about her and how she didn't have a home, how she did not have financial resources, how she didn't have promise of an education, how she didn't have promise of a family, and how I could be that person if he would sign this document for me. Within 10 minutes, it was all signed. He read through it. It was all signed, and I was out the door. But what I learned was as long as I made it about me and what I wanted, I was going to fail. But when I turned it around to what mattered to him, I found success.
I love that story. And it's funny you flip that around. So I think as you're telling this story, I could think about a lot of situations where, you're looking for what's in it for me, but really the me is the person that is on the other side of the table or the other side of the presentation. They're asking the question, what's in it for me? Instead of focusing on the actual presenter, is being able to do that mental flip the other direction. It seems like that's what you're able to successfully accomplish.
Exactly. That's why I put a chapter in my book about helping others find their win so you win. And in this chapter, I encourage us to check our hearts, check our emotions, the reason that we're doing the things that we're doing. Are we really doing it just to promote ourselves and to take care of ourselves? Or do we really care about our audience? Do we care about the people to whom we're talking and to whom we're working?
Yeah, that's a really powerful. And I know also it's funny that you mentioned the word you and how you're communicating with people. I was working with our marketing department and I saw that we were just using too much of words like they and we and I thought, why are you not directing it at you like you're, and so how do you coach people to, instead of watering down their use of pronouns, to actually focus on you? Like what is the core there?
That's a very keen observation from you. Using words like they really isolates your audience and keeps your audience out of the picture. And what we're looking for, in fact, I discuss this in the book, we really want to use the word you as soon as it's relevantly possible. Like, it can't be too soon, but as quickly as possible. If we interject the word you, what we're doing is we're letting our audience know this is specific to you. This isn't a generic conversation. This isn't a generic approach. What I'm making is very you-centric. So I encourage people, we try to find a way, how can we put the word you in as soon as possible into any conversation that we're having or writing that we're doing?
I think it's a more courageous, braver, bolder way to communicate. And also, it seems to me, it more establishes the presenter as an authority.
Absolutely. And that's part of the approach in persuasive communications. I have a chapter where we talk about becoming an industry expert, how you become the go-to person. And sometimes people think only if you're self-employed or only if you own the company is that important. And I kind of push back on that a little bit because I don't think we have to be the owner of the company or the entrepreneur. We can be within a company and we can build out our brand, build out our role as the industry expert, the guru, the go-to person in our space, which elevates our credibility within the company and ultimately our ability to persuade people around us.
Yeah, we have politics and friction and latency within every organization, whether we're an entrepreneur or whether we're within our own businesses. There's always, it seems like, and I think I remember bringing this up to someone, that I think all of us have a responsibility to sell what we believe and sell ourselves or sell our message. And I know it's not a word that people like to hear, but I like the word, persuasion. It's probably a softer way to say it, but it's really, really important for leadership.
Absolutely. And I think when we go back to like what you're just saying here, and we think less of the word sell and more of the word like persuasion, for example, and especially when we understand the difference, because sometimes people do equate manipulation and persuasion, and they think it's just this awful, horrible, dirty space that no one wants to be in. But when we break these apart and we really take a minute to understand what manipulation is, and when we understand what persuasion is, and then we understand the difference, I think it sets off light bulbs and it sets us free to be willing to go to persuade others as a way to help find success.
Yeah, and I think it's important for people to listen. What I love about your approach is it doesn't matter whether you're the flamboyant extrovert or you're an introvert, really spending time to examine the WIFM, the person that you're talking to, what's in it for them, what's in it for, what's the message you're trying to elicit and convey to them, not for you. And that's a challenge for people to get out of their own head.
Yeah, absolutely. And part of this, from my perspective, is like one of the ways that we can show that this really is about them is by our willingness to make a connection with them. And again, I always say, check your heart. Like, do you really care? Do you care? I mean, this is about being human. This is about being kind to other people and finding ways that we can connect with other people and to whatever degree and willingness they are willing to connect. So in the book, I talk about several things like humor. Like, humor is one of the best approaches we can use for people to drop down the barriers and walls, especially if they think we're coming to sell something to them. But by using humor, it's so important to me that I'm in the middle of a 10-week class on writing and performing stand-up comedy. And I'm doing that to help my stage presence, to help me be able to connect with other people. But we can use things like humor, compassion, empathy, things like storytelling as well, and authenticity are great tools to help us make that connection with our audience. And that does give them the confidence that we care about them and we are centered on them.
This is great. I just think it's so timely. We are having this conversation. Just a firm believer in persuasion. I know your book's being launched. Did you say January 1st?
January 1st, 2019.
So how can people learn more about you, kind of get on your mailing list so that they'll get notified of your book coming out? What's the best ways to go about doing that?
The simplest way to do it is just to text the word persuade to 66866. That's 66866. And here's what's going to happen. When you text the word persuade, you'll get a message back. Enter your email address, and I'm going to send a free copy, a soft copy of the chapter on my book on crafting a simple message. And in this chapter, I drill down, I help people understand what you need to do to get that initial message crafted. Some tips in there, some stories in there as well. It's all available for free.
This is great. I appreciate this, Jeff. Now, as we wrap up, is there any pieces that you were hoping I would ask you that you'd really like people to know before we wrap our call today?
Yeah, let me leave with this, and this is one of the things I like to leave with on stage as well. To end the conversation here around the adoption, when I finished, I was in the airport in Miami, and the baby was whimpering. She had double ear infection. She went through a lot of pain. She screamed the whole flight back. And I stood in the airport there, and I felt proud and accomplished for a few minutes. But as quickly as that came, it just went out the door. And here's what I began to wonder as I looked at her. I began to think through, like, what her life is going to be. And I began to wonder, hey, is she going to be a doctor and heal people? Will she be a humanitarian and relieve suffering? Would she be a teacher and impact hundreds of students that could impact thousands of lives? And while I didn't have answers to that, what I did know was that I was wrong in thinking that the adoption was over. This was just like the first stone that fell in, like tossing a stone into a pond or a lake. We've probably all done that. We know what that thump is like, and then we know the ripples that continue out. So the adoption was like that stone going in, but this thing is going to continue beyond me. I will never know some of these lives that she's going to impact. And sometimes as entrepreneurs or people working within companies, our heads fall down and we start thinking about the emails, and we start thinking about the meetings that we have to do. We think about the coffee, the lunch meetings. And I encourage people to lift your head back up and realize the things that we are doing are going to impact lives beyond us. If we're entrepreneurs creating jobs, that means somebody's going to put food on the table. That means that a kid might could get tutoring, or a kid could go to extracurricular activity, and that's going to change that kid's life. So I encourage us all to know that there's a greater good that happens when we make the right choices in life.
Yeah, it's so true, though. We don't really know your metaphor of dropping that rock in the middle of a pond, and when you wake up in the morning when it's flat, you just never know what shores that your message is going to impact, how you're going to impact things in the future, and what little lever that you turn has an impact you're not aware of right now.
I'm a firm believer in that. I firmly believe that if we are out there doing good for others, and if we really care about other people, and we're seeking out ways to help other people, to create new scenarios for them, better lives for them, that this will extend beyond us. And this is a great time in our world to exhibit kindness and compassion and caring for other people. And it will continue well beyond anything that we'll ever know. That wakes me up. That motivates me. That gets me excited to be back on stage.
Yeah, it's certainly a bigger purpose for sure. And this is a great message, Jeff. Thank you for sharing this with my audience today.
Thank you for the time and trusting me with your audience and to deliver some sound advice to them. So I appreciate this opportunity. Thank you.
Have a great day.
Thank you.
So there you have it. This wraps another episode of Bill Murphy's Red Zone podcast. To get all the relevant show notes, please go to our blog at www.redzonetech.net/podcast. Additionally, make sure you go to iTunes and leave your comments in iTunes about the show. This helps our show rankings enormously, and it helps support the show. Until next time, I appreciate you very much for listening. Thank you.